afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Did you? Or have I just been wished upon? My brief this afternoon is to just share some thoughts on record keeping and documentation. If I were to ask any one of you, why do we maintain records? What is the purpose of your documentation? I wonder what you'd say. It's all right, I'm not going to pick on anyone, but I'd like to think, if I asked any one of you, you'd say to me, that's easy. There's only one reason we maintain records, and that is to facilitate care, treatment, and support of our patients or clients. In other words, you'd be saying to me, documentation is an integral part of care. And if you'd said that, I'd have been really pleased. But you know, as a lawyer, I'm not sure that that goes far enough. I take the view that you have not discharged your duty of care until you have both done and documented. The law places equal value on each activity, and only when both have been professionally completed can you move on, job done. There's no hierarchy. I still come across staff who say record keeping is a chore. Or worse, they'll tell me it gets in the way of the real work. Sorry for people. Documentation is as much real work as a hands-on therapeutic intervention. You'd say to me, quite properly, good care doesn't just happen, but is planned. I'd agree with that. I would say to you equally, good documentation doesn't just happen, but is planned. And in organising your day, you'll say, I need X, which is my direct contact with the patient, plus Y to write it up. And X plus Y is your total commitment to that patient or client. Someone who says it gets in the way of the real work demonstrates they don't understand the nature of their role and their clinical responsibility. I've never understood why we have the dichotomy. Hands-on therapeutic intervention, people sitting writing. I think we should try much harder to integrate the two. Certainly in the trust where I work, we do that. For example, if we have outpatient clinics, letters are to be written. The rule is the clinician dictates the letter in the consulting room with the patient still present. And to me that's so important, because although often patients, clients engage, they need not always absorb and retain. And I think to be present while that letter is being written is powerful reinforcement. Our ward staff are required to complete the documentation with the patient. And when we launched the scheme, we said, find the patient. Sit in the day room, do it at the bedside, but make sure the patient is involved and knows what we're writing. When I think back to my early days in the health service, notes used to have on the cover, not to be handled by the patient. And we were incredibly paternalistic. Do any of you remember the last Monty Python film, Meaning of Life? Lovely sketch in there, woman in theatre being prepared for caesarean section. Consultant busy organising the team. Woman looks up from the table. What do I do? Nothing, my dear. You're not qualified. And that was the approach. Patients didn't participate, but were done to. And of course today, we talk about working in partnership and involving patients in their documentation is part of that empowerment. Because ultimately, the patient is the decision maker. Your role as clinicians is to empower the patient to make for themselves their own balanced, informed decisions. So I'm saying we need to work at this, involve patients. My vision for the community, handheld device with voice recognition. So at the end of your time, you dictate, it goes to the database, and the client hears and is involved. And the technology is there, the cost is against us at the moment. But it'll come. Do you remember your first mobile? The brick. And do you know what the first mobiles cost? Best part of £3,000. And look where we are today. And I think the future is going to be the handheld device with voice recognition. Watch this space. There's a problem. If staff devalue documentation, that will be reflected in the quality of entry. Here's a nursing note. Patient spent a comfortable night, comma, until she died. I know exactly what had happened, slack part of the shift, let's get this written, slept well, come to, I've all read them. Going off duty, heavens, I can't leave that, the patient's dead. So she rushed back, full stop it came, comma, she penned the extra words, until she died, that's all right then. Nothing about any support or intervention at the end. I remember on one occasion, I was part of the inspection team, private nursing home. And as you can imagine, I always look at their documentation. I was curious to read, and they were so unlucky. But for one of their patients, for the past 3 nights, the nursing staff had written, slept well. Now, the reason I was curious was I happened to know 3 days earlier that patient had been admitted to our hospital as an acute medical emergency, and that's where she still was. Do you think the nurses were phoning over every night? How is Our Lady? We need to complete the documentation. Of course not. You know what they've done? Picked up the pack, written the lot, without even checking names. And it's degenerated into a meaningless chore. Here's a health visitor's entry. And she's written tatty, house and garden. Now tell me, because you're all professionals, what does tatty mean, please? What do you think she's saying? Untidy, shabby, neglected, run down? Maybe. Clinically, what is its significance? Now, if this is a sudden marked change, it may lose significance. Or is she trying to say something else? Hygiene. Are there untrained pets? No one clearing up after them? But you don't know. And I took the view this was a judgmental entry, and she was really saying, this isn't my standard. And you see, if it is a little bit tired and shabby, so what? It may be a warm, loving environment for the kids. I'd be much more worried about that pristine flat. Nothing out of place, not a scratch anywhere, not a toy in sight. That would worry me. I decided I'd better see her. And when we met, my worst suspicions were confirmed. She started by saying that our requirements, that's the trust requirements, for documentation were not a good use of her time. Now what's worrying about that is that she's looking at it as being something we require of her. I take the view it is her responsibility as a practitioner to maintain documentation. And what she's really saying is, I don't understand the nature of my role and its responsibilities. So I say to her, what do you mean, not a good use of your time? She said, well, I've got so much to do. Health promotion, clinics, home visits, and then all of this. And she actually described all of this as a management imposition. So again, she's gone back, we're imposing it. I suppose I ought to be grateful. She does acknowledge we manage her. And she went on to say, her concession to us, that's big of her, isn't it? She sets aside a couple of hours each week on Friday afternoon to sit in her office and write up her week's work. Now that's horrendous, isn't it? Because if she's really as busy as she says, by Friday afternoon, muddled, blurred, inaccurate, totally unreliable, no way is she going to retain accurately 4.5 days of busyness. And worse, were to be knocked down by a bus on Thursday night, there'll be no documentation at all. And legally, she's laying up real problems for her and the trust. You know that evidentially I can use contemporaneous documentation as evidence in court. And contemporaneous means written at or about the time of the event. Ideally, I would like you to write as you go. I recognize that isn't always possible, because there will be clinical priorities. But what we say to you, please make your entries as close to the event as you can. I was discussing this with a judge a fortnight ago, and he was talking about credibility, weighing up the evidence. And he said, of course, the closer to the event the entry is, the more reliance I can place on it as a judge. So evidentially, it's strong if written at the time. You have a 24-hour window. So if you capture the data within 24 hours, it's contemporaneous. Outside that 24-hour window, it's not contemporaneous and not admissible as evidence without permission from the court. So, in reality, everything that she has written that predates Thursday lunchtime is evidentially worthless. Now, in order to show that your documentation is contemporaneous, you both date and time the entry. And the time I expect to see in the margin is the time you put pen to paper, because that's how I can say to the judge, we know when that entry was made. Actual times in the text. So if we would write something now, you'd say 1300, I arrived in the text at the Civic Centre at. So the actual time we there, we say it was just about an hour ago, recall is going to be good. So we need contemporaneous documentation. I'm often asked, what should I write? How much should I write? And of course, I can't answer that. I think it's the wrong question. I'm not interested in quantity. What I'm looking for is quality. Those of you who've been around will know how the NHS goes through fads and phases. Some of you, like me, I'm sure will remember the era which I now describe as minimal documentation. I cringe. And I remember saying this, the less you write, the better. If it's not there, you can't be challenged. And today that's unbelievable. And of course, it's come back to haunt us. I was talking to a couple of midwives end of last year. They'd like to be witnesses in a forthcoming trial. And I was asking them about a delivery with which they assisted some 14 years ago. And one of them said to me, I wish I'd written more. And I thought, yes, so do I. Now, I haven't said that to her, but we are in real difficulties. Because back then, it was that minimalistic era, but 14 years on, without those entries, we can't piece together precisely what happened at delivery. But of course, the other extreme is as bad. This was a community psychiatric nurse. I just wanted to check detail, domiciliary visit, depot injection. I found the entry. To my surprise, it ran to 6.5 sides of A4. It began with what I can only describe as a whinge about the problems he had in parking his car. He then sets out, in great detail, as if we're going to audit him, the route he took on foot from that parked vehicle to the client's address. He's named every street, tells us when to cross the road, turn corners, helpfully he's put in the landmarks, the pillar box, the church, the Rising Sun pub, it's all there. He describes the approach to the house. I can even tell you the colour of the front door. He then goes on to say, inadvertently he rang the wrong bell. I then get a picture, a pen picture of the non-client and a verbatim account of their conversation. And so it went on. 6.5 pages of drivel. Till it ended, I arrived back at my car and drove away. And I thought, has he got problems? Or not enough to do? And he said, I call this heart sink material. You take one look at that watch, your heart sinks, you can't be bothered with this, and you don't know what you might miss. I took out the highlighter. Clinically significant, some 5 lines buried in 6.5 pages. The real question you ought to ask is quite different. I think you should be saying, if I came to this patient, this client, cold for the first time, what would I need to know? So I'd like to think, if you were unlucky enough to be knocked down by that bus, you don't return to work. From a care perspective, the patient, client, wouldn't notice the difference. Because whoever stood in your shoes, pick up your notes, see precisely where you were, and without a word could carry on where you left off. If your documentation doesn't enable that to happen, I'm tempted to ask, why bother? The reality is, you've lost the plot. Record keeping is not a chore. It's a powerful tool, and it's a tool to assist. And that tool has two purposes. The first is the prompt, the aide-memoire, the reminder. This is where I am, this is a plan, this is where I'm going. Because with your large caseloads, your busyness, you cannot accurately hold that detail in mind. You need that prompt to make sure you're on course. Equally, and secondly, it is your means of communication with your colleagues. Because this is how we can ensure appropriate and quality continuity of care. Remember, communication is a two-way process. Transmit, receive. Most of us, I suspect, find it easier to transmit than to receive. I remember one occasion I was traveling on a bus. A couple of women engaged in an animated conversation, totally oblivious to the rest of us, so I had no qualms about listening in. And as I listened, I very quickly realised it wasn't a conversation. It was two monologues. When this woman stopped, that one started. No correlation at all between what they were saying. And I worked out what must be going on is while this one is speaking, she's not listening, but thinking, what shall I say next? And she paused a breath, and she's in. And the other one did the same, and they got off quite happily, but both in transmission mode. I watch my doctors do this. They consent the patient, form signed, walk off, job well done, and the patient turns around to the nursing staff. What was all that about? The nursing staff. What was all that about? Because they've been transmitting. Now, all of you, by virtue of the jobs you do, are superb communicators. Because you've got to engage with your colleagues, with patients, with clients. And of course, you pick up from them by their comments, their questions, they're on board. Or, hasn't quite understood, I'll have to rephrase that, put that slightly differently. And of course, you've also got body language. You've got that closed person, folded arms, staring at you, hard work. Or you get the smile, the nod, the engagement, you're on board. And I watch all of you just to make sure you're on board. And I think I'm all right. I haven't seen too many people resting their eyes yet. And the one that worries me is not when they look at the watch, but when they start shaking it. But that engagement helps you to assess message received and understood. The problem about documentation, you can't validate message received and understood, because the reader is not present. And I often describe this as whistling into the wind. And of course it means that when you make an entry, you must have the reader in mind. Before you write, ask yourself, what is the message I am trying to transmit? What do I want my colleague to take away having read this entry? See, for me, your documentation consists of bullet points, captured in the context of care, written with fellow professionals in mind. And the rule, keep it simple, keep it accurate, keep it professional. Quite straightforward. If you think about any major inquiry, what is identified as a failing on every occasion? Failure in communication. Some of you may remember Kimberly Carlyle, London Borough of Greenwich, Kimberly, the unseen child, murdered by Hall, her stepfather. The health visitor and social worker involved had worked with one another in the past. They knew one another, trusted and respected one another's professions. Independently, they were both becoming increasingly worried, because whenever any agency called, Kimberly was never there. Older, younger siblings, high profile, happy, well-adjusted, loved members of the family. But Kimberly, not to be seen. When asked, oh, she's out playing with friends, we're not sure where, don't know when she'll be back. Or she's out with her neighbours today, they'll drop her back when they return. She's at her nan's. Oh, she's at the school. She was preschool age. They shared their concerns and decided they needed to have a strategy meeting to address these concerns. Before arrangements had been put in place, one Friday afternoon, social worker had been working late at the office. On his way home, spur of the moment, impulse thought, I wonder. And he made a detour and called at the Carlyle's flat. Rang the bell. Hall's stepfather answers the door. He's described as threatening and intimidating, known history of violence, doesn't take kindly to those working in the public service. You can imagine the outburst when he realised his words, this was a busybody social worker encroaching on his privacy, his family's weekend. Give the social worker his due, he stood his ground and said, I'm sorry, I know you don't like me, but I've got a job to do. I've got no right to come in, and of course, if you send me away, I shall go. But if you do send me away, I have to report it, you'll be called in, it'll all escalate, it won't like that. Better deal with me now. Grudgingly, Hall lets him in. And then says, we've just put Kimberly down. Not having the likes of you disturb her. Recognise you've got a job to do. Fine, we'll get your chair. You take her to the door, stand on it, look through the glass above, and when you've seen enough, on your bike. So, she'll work things. I've pushed my luck. I'm probably not going to get any further this evening. I better do as they suggest. So he stands on the chair, looks at us, sure enough, female, child, age appropriate, sleeping peacefully, regular breathing. He beats a hasty retreat. Outside, sheer relief, he pens a quick note to his health visitor colleague which reads, "I have seen Kimberly." She received that early the next week, thinks, thank goodness, documents, no immediate cause for concern, review in 4 weeks' time. A fortnight later, Kimberly was dead. At the inquiry, they said that contact probably represented the last opportunity for a meaningful intervention. Does the entry, "I have seen Kimberly," give the reader any idea of what I have just described to you? Question: had he seen Kimberly? It probably was, but he's never seen her. And of course all he could see was the head, the hair, the face. Of course we now know it was only her face and hands which were unmarked. The health visitor said because she knew him, she'd worked with him, she took the words at face value. But interestingly, if it had been someone she hadn't known, she'd have asked for more detail. He said it was written, sheer relief. He didn't have the notes with her because he hadn't planned to make the visit. His plan was, when he got to the office on Monday, pull the file, make the entry, and discuss it with the health visitor. He couldn't remember what had happened, suspected he came in to immediate tasks, slipped his mind. That visit was never written up. He no longer practices as a social worker. But how would you live with yourself after a tragedy of that nature? And although clearly he meant well, his motivation was fine, what a foolish thing to do. Out of hours, no one knew he was going round to an aggressive, violent individual. And somewhere there was, on both their parts, in my view, a lack of professionalism. Keep it simple, keep it accurate, keep it professional. Now, records are an integral part of care, but they also have a secondary role, their evidential value. Long after you've finished with them, people like me become interested. Remember, anything you write in the course of your work has the potential status of a legal document and may one day see the light of day in court. As in court, on one occasion, a GP's notes were produced, and I fell for it, because the last entry was very simple. "She is mad!" ! exclamation mark, and a cartoon drawing of the patient alongside. And of course, the last thing he ever thought one day, the judge, the lawyers will be looking at this. From my perspective, cases are won and lost on the quality of your notes. I say to you, good records, good defense. Poor records, poor defense. No records, forget it. And remember that other very important maxim, if it's not in the notes, it didn't happen. Of course, the reality, in all legal proceedings, you start off at a disadvantage. Claims are not brought to nice and convenient day, month, week, or even year after the event. Often, it will be many years later. But I promise you this, when you are sued, your patient, your client, will remember everything. That contact with it was the high spot of their day. They've relived it, retold it, then she did this and he did that, guess what happened, it's all there. And when I say to you, do you remember Mrs. Smith? You saw her that Tuesday in June 3 years ago. What happened at 10:30 in the morning, please? You won't have a clue. The judge determines the issue on the balance of probabilities, which really means, who do I believe, who's got the best evidence? Now, faced with a claimant, your patient or client, on oath remembers everything, and you, the practitioner, who remembers little or nothing, the claimant wins. Not unreasonable, is it? So imagine, on some future occasion, you and I meet in court. I put you through a pace in cross-examination, get what I want, spit you out, next witness. Chances are, if I met you in the street, fortnight later, wouldn't even recognize you. You're gone with the rest. But my guess is you will never ever forget that encounter. Oh, it was so unfair. He tricked me into saying that, then he did that. Guess what happened? It's all there. You'll dine out of it for years. And no doubt embellish the tale in the telling. And imagine I were to hear your account, say in 2 years' time, and I was totally honest. I'd probably have said, do you know, some of that sounds like me. Because of course it would be based on a real experience and a real encounter. The problem we have, the memory is fallible. Nothing sinister here. If I say to any one of you, have you got childhood memories? Like me, of course I have. But I wonder, if we were able to match recollection with reality, I suspect there'll be major discrepancies. Because with the passage of time, quite subconsciously, we edit and rationalize. And that version, which the patient can't remember so clearly as if it were yesterday, may in reality differ substantially from what really happened. But my problem in defending, when we get to court, they genuinely believe their version. How can you be so sure? Oh, day before my husband's birthday, so the reference point. Can you describe the practitioner and what she was wearing? I said, oh, that's me. Or I'll do a MET check. And what was the weather like that day, please? And would you believe they're spot on? So it's quite difficult to disentangle the reality from the rest around it. But here's a different scenario. Your patient or client is there, relying on a fallible memory. In fact, they've got nothing going for them, zero. We've got you, contemporaneous documentation, plus and your professional status. Plus. Plus, plus, zero, no contest. You win every time. You see, if you are a practitioner on the register, you're deemed to be fit and proper to discharge those responsibilities. And I always say to witnesses, before they go in the box, remember, you start off with credibility and integrity. That's a given. It stands in the bank to your credit. The trick is to come out with those still intact. And never, ever lie. Because once you've lost credibility, effectively, you've lost your professional status. But of course, documentation can be something of a two-edged sword. If you're involved in litigation, I will see your notes long before I see you, and I'll form a view. And then, when we meet in court, I'll say, "Now, madam, do you consider yourself to be a professional?" And that will be one answer you've lost already. So I say, "Yes, I'm correct." "Well, madam, can we look at your notes together? Is this a professional way to maintain your documentation?" And of course, if you have to concede that your documentation is less than professional, well, madam, if your documentation is less than professional, doesn't that also extend to your care for patients? I was prosecuting at NMC recently, and I was summing up the case for the panel. I said, "Remember the staff nurse who appeared before us this morning, the one with the sloppy notes and sloppy care?" No one challenged me. "You see what I've done? By their fruits shall ye know them." Now I know that your records are beyond reproach, aren't they, madam? And when we look at them together, there won't be a problem. Next time you make an entry in the notes, just think of me standing behind you, our madam. In my trust, we audit. And by and large, the outcome of audit is good. And every time I get a claim, the notes are not good. And I think, what's going on? I know, and you know, when do things go wrong? When you're under pressure. And when you're under pressure, what's the first thing that gives? Documentation. Perversely, I'm saying to you, the greater the pressure under which you're working, the more important does the documentation become. That day, it was plain sailing, care as planned, beautiful entries. We'll never look at that lot again. But that morning, pandemonium, phones ringing, staff not there, everything yesterday, that's when it goes wrong, and that's when you skimp the notes. And I'm saying to you, when that crisis is past, maybe at a shift, sit down, revisit the notes, amend, clarify, add, explain. Make sure when you walk away that has accurately captured what you've experienced that shift. I know it's a pain. It may be 10, 15 precious minutes. If you don't do that, you can look forward to an hour or two of heart searching when you come to write your witness statement, and you can look forward to 2-3 hours of hostile cross-examination in the box. If you're not fussed about problems in putting together your statement, you quite relish an encounter with me in the box, fine. Skip your notes, your wish will be granted. If you'd rather that didn't happen, that can have a small investment at the time. will potentially pay dividends later. I've always said, the secret of success in court is preparation. I won't go to court till I know my case inside out and backwards. I can't afford to be taken by surprise. When I talk to trainee lawyers, I said if you want to win in court, it depends 96% preparation, 2% luck, 2% law. Have you ever thought, as you sit, pen poised, about to make your entry in the notes, it is at that instant you are preparing for court. That's where it all begins. Those entries are the building blocks I need. With professional entries, we've got the bricks, we build the wall, robust defence. Give me straw, it'll blow away in the wind, and you'll be left totally exposed. Can I perhaps leave you with a further thought? This afternoon, I think I've given you some good advice. Please disregard everything I have told you. Please keep on making your mistakes. I need you. But good luck.